we've all had this. It's like you walk around and you're young, and then one day you realize that you're not young. You're sexy, and then you realize actually no one's even looking at you anymore. You nag your children to clean their room, and one day there's silence where that child once was. You healthy until you get a diagnosis that brings you to your knees. And really the reality of life is that tough emotions are part of our contract with life. Like we don't get to have a meaningful career or raise a family or leave the world a better place without stress and discomfort. And yet we live in a culture that pays lip service to like going towards your, going out of your comfort zone, but that at its core really has this idea that there's good and bad emotions. And so you start looking at the just frightening, public health crisis, which is that depression is now the leading cause of disability globally.
Right. It's crazy.
Outstripping cancer.
It's insane.
Outstripping heart disease. And so I think that what starts to happen is we start almost creating a situation where we aren't able to process difficult emotions when we're in a society that tells us positive thinking is all that matters or positive emotions are all that matter. And so we actually don't develop skill sets around this. And so the core ideas behind emotional agility is this idea that in order to navigate the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, we need to be able to strengthen our capability with the full range of this beautiful, messy, difficult human experience.
Right. In a culture in which we're actively encouraged to go out of our way to avoid all of these unpleasant emotions. And if you should find yourself in the grips of them, you should be ashamed of yourself. And whether it's as simple as security and safety and luxury and comfort and all of that, and being squarely within your comfort zone, or just the sort of daily emotions that we all experience on some level along the spectrum of guilt, shame, fear. Abandonment, whatever it is.
So all and even just our language, which we often, again, it's with good intentions. A friend of mine recently died of breast cancer, and she said to me, we were talking about this tyranny of positivity, and she said to me, it's so difficult because when you have cancer and when that cancer is terminal, every person you come into contact with tells you to just stay positive, just stay positive. And what she described is that it took her away from actually being able to have authentic, meaningful end-of-life conversations that she needed to have. That even in her dying, she was living and she was able to and wanted to be able to have real conversations with people that she loved. But it becomes very difficult when you try have those conversations and people are like, oh, you're being negative, or you're not going to beat this cancer.
It says more about the discomfort of the person delivering that, because it is so uncomfortable for most people to talk about death, and these things are scary. So when they may be well-intentioned saying stay positive, but most likely they're uncomfortable with anything other than that, right? So it's their way of like, well, I have to say something.
Yeah, well, it's a Band-Aid for the individual, and again, it's done with great. It's done, I'm not trying to, but it's a Band-Aid for the person who's delivering that rather than actually being fundamentally helpful. So often, I'm not saying there might be many people in the world who experiencing illness where someone saying stay positive is helpful. But I know that there are many people that I've spoken to who find that it feels like, okay, now not only do I need to beat my cancer, but I've now got to deal with these somehow bad thoughts that I'm not allowed to be having. Right.
And hold up this face of strength when you don't feel like it, and feel badly if you can't live up to that. Kind of inside of that also is this idea that you explore, which is that the more we do actively deny these emotional states, the more we empower them. Like below the surface, the more we try to pretend they're not there, the stronger they become. They're doing push-ups in the dark.
Well, it's so fascinating. So again, I just want to stress that I'm not anti-happiness or like anti-being positive. What I'm anti is a narrative that constructs good and bad around these things and then leads us into stages of expectation that I should be happy or that I can't be unhappy. And yeah, it's fascinating when you look, for instance, at people who have a very strong expectation that they need to be happy, and you track those people over time, those people become less happy. That there's this, when you hold this idea that happiness is more important than meaning, is more important than purpose, is more, then what it is it sets up some kind of goal that is fundamentally unattainable. And so people who actively strive to be happy become less happy over time. What it also does is it leads to greater levels of, in the book I talk about different ways of dealing with emotion that are difficult. And one way is bottling our emotions, where we push aside difficult emotions. The other is brooding, where we dwell on. And what's fascinating is when you bottle emotions, when you push aside difficult emotions, there's this effect that's an amplification or a rebound effect, that these emotions actually come back stronger and more. And people have experienced this. If you again, on a diet and you're trying not to think of chocolate cake, we know that you start dreaming of chocolate cake. When you ask people to not think a particular thought and you time them for a minute, most people will have that thought that's been banned 40 times within that minute. So this idea of trying to push aside, suppress, move away from these difficult thoughts and feelings, it just doesn't work.
Right. Allow yourself to feel them as part and parcel of being human, but also understand that thoughts are just things and emotions are just things. And, one of the kind of tools or lessons that I've learned in sobriety is, addicts and alcoholics drink because they don't want to feel, they want to change their emotional state. They don't want to feel however unconscious that decision is. It's a decision to try to not feel however they feel, right? And sobriety is about understanding and learning and embracing the fact that these emotions, although they may feel like they're going to kill you, they're just emotions.
Yes.
They have the power that we attach to them. Yeah. And if we can allow ourselves to just be okay feeling them, there is one thing that is certain, and that ultimately they will shift and pass.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. The radical acceptance of our emotions, even the difficult ones, is the cornerstone.
But it's so scary. It's scary.
It's scary. And this is, again, when you're parenting, we're helping your children very young to start labeling their emotions, not trying to rush in and save your children from difficult emotions, because when you save them from difficult emotions, they don't learn, oh, I was feeling sad 15 minutes ago and that emotion has now passed.
I mean, my happiness is not derived from getting the next thing. Or, I wrote about this in this book. I said that somewhere along the line, I realized that having a lot of shit ain't what brings you happiness, because I never had nothing. And I've given what I did make when I had it, I gave it away. And my mom, she couldn't understand when I took $150,000 that I had saved up and opened up the yoga center and then maintained it for 10 years, spending probably close to $500,000. She's like, you could,
as a non-profit, like it was
non-profit.
For free, right?
Yeah, I didn't get anything. As a matter of fact, I did the construction in the place too at 93 St. Mark's, and then I just turned over the key. And I was kind of like the protector of the place, making sure nobody came there and fucked with it or did anything. What's known as like the temple commander, I just made sure nobody fucked around and did anything stupid. And when people came in there and misbehaved, they got a warning. And then the next time it's like, all right, motherfucker. But the point is, my mother was like, you could have had a house. You could have had all. And I'm like, Ma, this is what I want you to do. I want you to come to the Sunday feast. And I want you to meet the people that this place is helping. And the family that we've developed with the community and all these beautiful people that have gotten off drugs and overcome horrible shit by doing what I did with the Bhakti Yoga. And this is the place that they're learning it and they're healing. So she came to the Sunday feast and she's like, now I understand. She was like, this is the most fucking beautiful thing that these people are changing their lives. You're helping so many people. And I'm like, you know, there's a lot of people living in big mansions, man, and they're miserable people, and they have no love, and all their friends are there.
They live all around here. There's a lot of them around here.
Yeah, we pass some places, but, you know, everyone's sponging off them, and they don't know who to trust. Are they after my money? It's like, if you're my friend, I know you're my friend because you're my friend. I ain't got shit to give you. Only thing I could give you is my time and my service and try to help you. You're not my friend because you could get something from me materialistically. I don't have that to offer. And when it comes, it comes. I'm not attached to it either way. The Bhagavad Gita says you have the right to the work. You don't have the right to the results of the work. That's not what you're supposed to concentrate and meditate on. But the happiness of the service that I've done over since I learned about it in 81 and started my journey, I wouldn't trade it for the fucking world. If you said to me, yo, you can go back and I'm going to give you fucking $10 million, I wouldn't take it. And that's the God's honest truth. I've turned down TV shows and all kinds of shit because it's not along the lines of my core values and what I see as important. So my happiness is not derived from, it's derived from service.
And what's interesting is that's very punk rock.
It is. You know? It's not selling out.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to sell out. That's the ethics of punk rock. But too many motherfuckers did sell out. Everybody could talk the talk, but guess what? What does McKee say? True characters revealed under pressure. And when that money came dangling in front of people's faces, you saw a lot of people change and take off one uniform and put on another. This ain't a motherfucking uniform for me. That's why even back in the day, I said, this ain't about fashion and clothes and how you look. Some of the most punk rock motherfuckers I ever met don't look like a punk rocker. Punk rock is a spirit, man. It's a fucking consciousness. It's like, fuck the man. It's about us, the people. And how do we help people? You know, you can't just, and that's one of the things I always said about punk rock. I'm like, it ain't enough to just fucking complain about something and bitch about it. How do we fix it? And that's where...
That's not punk rock. Punk rock is more like anarchy, like blow it up, right? They're not big on solution.
Yeah, well, that was what I was finding. But then I was seeing people like the Bad Brains and Crass who started organic plant-based communities and fucking this and that. And like, you started hearing about other people and Chrissy Hine and what's she into. And she's into Vedic stuff and all these different people. And even the guy from The Dam, Captain Sensible, was vegan. And like all of this, you saw an underlying spirituality in the punk rock movement. And a lot of people in the movement, like I said, when I was getting down with this shit in 81 and 82, there wasn't too many aware, conscious punk rockers. A lot of them motherfuckers laughed that I stopped eating meat and that I would go to the Krishna temple and meditate and go do yoga. Oh, what do you... I mean, they wouldn't say it to my face.
Well, there's a straight edge, movement within punk, but that was later, right?
That came later. And that was part of the whole kind of judgmental. They didn't come at people on the same level. They came at people thinking they were superior to everybody else. And that's why everybody hated that fucking movement. And that's why everybody hated the fucking vegan movement. Because they didn't come out of compassion. A lot of people just were like, I have this knowledge that makes me superior to you. I'm even going to fucking, talk down to you like I'm better than you. And I think that's changed a lot now because more and more conscious people are getting into this for the right reasons. Like I said, I see it as a positive thing. And a lot of those people's voices got silenced. As a matter of fact, I've seen a lot of them go back to eating meat and leaving punk rock and straight edge and going back to do drugs and all kinds of shit. So when you get into something for the wrong reasons, that's not going to sustain. Your values and your desire will always be tested in life, whatever the fuck you pick up and decide to attach yourself to. That's why I don't put any of them labels on myself. I know what my ultimate service is. It's Bhakti Yoga.
Are two words that changed my life. And those words are remember tomorrow. When you have a split-second decision that you have to make or whatever, remember how that decision is going to make you feel tomorrow. You want to drop out of the marathon at mile 18? Fine. How are you going to feel tomorrow when someone says, how'd you do? You want to take off your shirt and drink tequila at the holiday party and dance on the table and swing around and be the life of the party. That's amazing at the party until tomorrow. And, those two words, if you really think about it, when you have a key decision or you're at a critical juncture in something big, how are you going to feel when you make this decision tomorrow? And it comes to peer pressure with, decisions, with drugs, with whatever. And that's really, those words have really impacted me. I'm going to blow off the workout today. Rich, we went late. It's an hour and a half. You haven't worked out yet. You know what? It's already the afternoon.
Fuck it.
How are you going to feel tomorrow about that? You're going to be pissed. Right? So that's a powerful thing. And any technique or tool or thing that you can give yourself to give you an edge and help you be better is amazing. And for me, those techniques come through trial and error, trying a bunch of different things. And it's not some expert telling me what to do. Yeah, maybe I'll try it, but I have to convince myself that it works, and that's been something, those words have been two words that really have worked for me.
Powerful, dude. I like it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think
it makes sense for me.
Well, I think what you have to do is you got to, it's like you said, you got to find the strategy that works for you. There's a million ways to do it. You can canvas, 1,000 successful people, and they're all going to tell you, a different approach to how they do what they do. And so when you, like read a book or listen to a podcast, and it's like, here's the morning routines of the most successful people. Well, that's great, but they're different, right? What works for you, what resonates with you, that does come through trial and error. And you've got to find your own groove. Like you keep talking about like, oh, this lane that I'm in. It's like, you got to find your lane.
Without question.
And the only way you find that lane is by trying on a million hats.
If someone with a lot of charisma tells you this is what he or she does, they might be able to pull it off because they have a lot of charisma. But if you're introverted, it's going to be very difficult to follow that advice. So,
well, not only that, like if you're like, well, Richard Branson does this in the morning, the idea that if you mimic what Richard Branson does in the morning, that you're going to become Richard Branson
right.
is ridiculous. And I feel like there's a lot of disingenuous kind of snake oil out there that's around selling these kinds of ideas rather than on getting people to do the inside work, to really figure out what makes them tick, to cultivate, that sense of self that will ultimately be the most powerful guiding force, to set you on the trajectory that you're meant to be on.
Now that's powerful. And you're right. It's what makes you tick.
It's the thing that I can say everything was worth it. All the work was worth it. You dream of it and you put in the hours, you put in the time. Again, there's no guarantee. Everybody works hard. But you believe in yourself and you buy into this idea every time you line up for a major. I mean, again, there's been twice where I thought not going to happen for me this time. But since 2011, moving forward, if I start a marathon, I'm there to try and win. Like, I believe I can win. I've been preparing the last 3 months and saying, well, I'm going to be a Boston Marathon champion. So what does a champion do? And you bring that attitude to every day. You act as if you're already there. And then if it doesn't happen, you have to deal with the aftermath and regroup and then buy into yourself again and keep doing that and not give up hope. And so it's a really hard thing to do and there's no guarantees, but it makes all of that worth it.
Yeah, I think if there's like a word that really kind of captures your career, it's persistence, right? You've got this phrase, keep showing up, right? You trademarked it, which is genius.
It's in the works.
I love that. And I have my computer here because I wanted to read this tweet that you had pinned, which is you posted this on March 5th. Some days it just flows and I feel like I'm born to do this. Other days it feels like I'm trudging through hell. Every day I make the choice to show up and see what I've got and try to be better. My advice, keep showing up. So can you expound on that a little bit? Because I think that's applicable to anyone and everyone who's chasing a goal or a dream.
Yeah. I mean, the last 10 months prior to this were really tough. And, it was as simple as go out for a run and don't skip the job just because you think it might go a certain way or you don't feel good. Just go and see. And most of the time you get out the door and it goes better than you thought. But if you don't do it at all, like you have no chance of getting better. It's a zero. You just look at it with some kind of regret, So there was a lot of days where I didn't want to get out the door in the past couple months, and it was just show up, just try, just see. And every time I've done that, it's a thing we say, there's no one comes back from a run and says, I wish I hadn't done that.
Right.
And so for me, it was just give yourself a chance, just try, just start. And it's not always going to go your way, but you don't know unless you show up.
Mm-hmm. And is that something that you apply in other areas of your life?
I try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a friend and as a wife and all of that, even personal relationships, it's just be there for people. Try and be a good wife. And some days it's hard, but you show up and you do the best you can. And that's how you get better. That's how you learn. And it's okay to fail. Just try again the next day.
Mm-hmm. What is your relationship with failure, or how do you think about failure?
Yeah, I'm actually incredibly comfortable with it. I talk about it quite often. Last year was the big thing where I was like, I'm trying to win the Boston Marathon. I put it out there very publicly. And afterwards, it didn't happen. I said, I failed, but that's okay. And people were like, you didn't fail. You were amazing, this and that. And I was like, no, it's like, I wanted to do this thing and I failed to do it. I failed. But failure is an action. It's not an identity. We do it all the time. And if you learn from it, you get better, and that's how you grow. Mm-hmm. So I think being super afraid of failure, you kind of miss the point. Like, those are the lessons. That's where you learn the most. Like, you fail your way to success.
And maybe that you get cancer when you're 55, and that was due to the fact that your immune system is not working as well as it could have because you're protein deficient, or you're B12 deficient, or you're vitamin D deficient, or you're folic acid deficient. So it's very important to say, let me avoid that malnourishment without interfering, though, with beneficial effects. So yeah, without needing to go into an area that where the protein becomes detrimental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my protein needs on that equation of 0.32, it comes out to about between 60 and 70 grams a day. It's not that hard. Like, I eat some almond butter, I eat rice and beans, I eat lentils and quinoa and things like that. As long as I'm just eating those foods, like, I've done the math, and it almost takes care of itself. Like, if I'm just eating clean plant-based foods close to their natural state. So it's not about going out of my way to make sure I'm eating, tons of garbanzo beans or anything.
No. I mean, I do that five days a week,
mm-hmm.
right? So my diet is plant-based 5 days a week. There's no problem. But I do pay attention. I know that a certain amount of certain vegetable contains so much protein.
Yeah, of course.
And so once you get used to that, you don't have to check anything. So it's very straightforward. I'm just saying that I suspect when they compare, let's say, the vegans against the non-vegans, and they show that the vegans are not doing better, mm-hmm. in those studies, I suspect that's because so many people in the vegan group are malnourished. Mm-hmm. And that's why you see this. Otherwise, I think the vegans should be doing much, much better than the non-vegans if it wasn't for malnourishment. So if you could turn the vegans into well-nourished vegan, then I think we'll see the superiority that we already see in the blue zones and in Loma Linda, etc.
Yeah, I think that's astute. I mean, I think my fear, and I think it's a very real fear, is that as we continue to produce all of these processed versions of meat and dairy products that are tasting better and better and better, that people that are entering into, becoming vegan can easily just be eating all sorts of refined grains all the time and cookies and snacks and things like that. And they're like, hey, I'm vegan, it's healthy, when in fact, it perhaps might even be worse than whatever they were doing before.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that this is why I talk about, once you figure out what the science and all these pillars are saying, go back to your grandparents' table, and among the healthy things, pick the ones that were common at their table. Mm-hmm. And so if you do that, then I think you're guaranteed, especially if you go with the grandparents or great-grandparents, that you're going to eliminate a lot of these new mm-hmm. processed foods that you're talking about. So I mean, I don't think there are too many grandparents that ate processed foods in the past. So
right. There's been much ado lately about the relationship between chronic inflammation and the onset of so many of these lifestyle illnesses that we're seeing. I'm interested in your perspective on that and what the relationship is between inflammation and aging.
Yes, that's a little tricky. I think it's clearly there. There is no doubt they're in the brain, and lots of people in the Western countries have high inflammatory markers. To me, it's more of a consequence of dysfunction than the cause of dysfunction. So I think that the liver is not working well, and so you start making C-reactive protein as a way to respond to dysfunctional state. And this is why we developed the fasting mimicking diet. And the idea was to, we can't change everybody's habits, but can we, for example, go after the inflammation, not just during the diet, but in the couple of months, 2 or 3 months after the diet. So is it possible to hit somebody with a 5-day diet? They will have long-term consequences on the inflammatory state, but not just the inflammatory state. But certainly that is one way to, I think, assess functionality of the entire system.
Right. Okay. So let's get into this world of fasting. I mean, when does it first become evident to you that this relationship between caloric restriction and the impact, biochemically, positive impacts biochemically starts to percolate into your awareness, and where do you go with that?
Yes. So first of all, a caloric restriction, which is what Walford was doing, which refers to eating, let's say, 25% to 30% less all the time. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work for some reason we know, some reason we don't know. But even in mice, the original observation were made 100 years ago. And then it turns out that about a third of the genetic backgrounds benefited from calorie restriction, a third had neutral effects, and a third had negative effects, right? So I think the periodic fasting mimicking diet builds on this success and failure. Why do you say success and failure? Success because if you look at calorie restricted people or monkeys, it's obvious that the positive effects are remarkable. For example, in the monkeys that were calorie restricted, the control monkey, 60% of them developed diabetes. In the calorie restricted monkey, 0. In the cardiovascular disease and cancer, reduction by 50%, 50, which is incredible.
And what kind of caloric restriction produced that?
25% in monkeys, right? Now, if you look at their lifespan, not change very much, right? So then what does it tell you? It tells you that obviously you could probably cure many, many diseases by doing the right intervention, but calorie restriction is not the way to do it, because it gives you as many problems as it gives you solutions. And this is in humans and in monkeys. Humans, we don't know for sure yet, but if you look at people that are calorie restricted, men that are calorie restricted have BMI of 19, 18.5, 19, they're really borderline anorexic. And, and you have to wonder, is this sustainable is it compatible with a lifespan of 110? Probably not, as it wasn't for the monkeys. So that's where then, back in the days, I made the observation, if I completely starve bacteria or I completely starve yeast, they live longer and they live stronger, right? So longer, stronger, meaning that you hit them with toxins, nothing. They're very strong. And both of them, and if you look at bacteria and yeast is a eukaryote, so they're being separated by hundreds of millions of years. So I started thinking, is it possible that you could do this for every organism and it's going to make it stronger and protect it for a long period? And that's where a lot of this comes from. And so jumping ahead 20 years then is the mouse studies that we first did, which were, what if you take a mouse and you give it this fasting mimicking diet? Why is it a fasting mimicking diet? What I was talking earlier about the nutrients determine what genes are activated or not, right? So if you have a certain composition, low protein, low levels of certain amino acids, and then have low sugar, high carbohydrate, but low sugar, and high fat, but good fats, right? All that, you put it together, then the response to the system is just like if you're giving it water only fasting. You just give it water. And you hit it for 4 days, and then you put them back on a bad diet, right? Relatively bad diet. This is a vegan, so 4 vegan days for the mice, and then 10 days of a animal-based diet, and then you keep doing this twice a month. Now we show that the mice live longer, about 11% longer, but the remarkable part is the cancers were reduced by almost 50%.
Wow!
And the inflammatory diseases were reduced by 50%. And these mice, just their cognitive abilities was much improved, right? So they just look younger, healthier. So they live longer, younger, and healthier. Then we did the human clinical trial with this prolonged fasting mimicking diet. And we did 3 cycles, once a month, 5 days, again, vegan, 5 vegan days of this low protein, low sugar, high good fat diet. And then we give them 25 days of no recommendation. Go back and do whatever it is that you always done. No exercise recommendation, no food, no nutrition recommendation. And then we measure the effects after a week and 3 months after the last cycle. And I think the results were remarkable. So lower cholesterol, lower blood pressure, lower triglyceride, lower fasting glucose, lower inflammation, systemic inflammation as measured by CRP, and lower IGF-1, which we believe is one of the key markers, risk factors for both aging and cancer. But the interesting thing, this happened it was much more powerful in people that had the problem to begin with. So if somebody started from an ideal situation, there were a lot less changes than somebody that started with high levels of this.
Yeah, of course.
My dream would be to have people have better knowledge of, access to, and the ability to take care of the foundational bases. And that is sleep well, get out in the sun, drink good water, eat a bunch of plants, move your body, eliminate modern day stressors, toxic loads, EMFs, stuff that's real. It's not hokey pokey. It's real stuff affecting us. In the worst condition, take medication from a qualified, I would say, functional medicine doctor who understands nutritionally and biochemically. And then put yourself into positive, stressful situations that evoke the body turning on kind of its natural instinct of accomplishment, of overcoming. So I think in all of those situations, if you do not have a foundation of those things, it's like trying to push a boulder uphill. If I'm running around, it's very clear on the evidence in water alone. If kids don't drink water and they go to school, their test results are in the toilet. I forget the exact stat, but it's like a 30%.
They've actually studied that, the impact of water on scholastic performance.
Oh, huge. And I have some in my book. I forget the exact, but it was like a few ounces, like a glass of water increased their performance by like 20 or 30%.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. Dehydration, bro, is like so destructive that, and the reptilian brain won't even allow you to think of the thirst because you have 7 to 10% of Americans not even drinking an ounce of water a day, or just going to their coffee and existing and living on adrenaline. That is their up and go molecule in their body that was only meant to get away from a lion, but they're living on it 24/7. You are frying your hormonal system. You're frying your central nervous system, i.e. brain. And we expect to then respond to this modern day overachieving situation when your basic, and also the other thing I said is proper breathing, right? What I didn't say is your basic needs you're going against your basic physiological need. So when at the root of autism, they've found dehydration, lack of nutrition, these kinds of situations. So I always look at, which is why I didn't write a superfood book. I wrote a super life book about foundational stuff, because I told the publisher, I don't want to write it on superfoods, because I don't want to be put in a thing like this is going to cure you or take you away. No, I want you to understand that there's foundational things that you can do that 99% of the people on the planet are going to thrive in if you take care of that. So all of these other things and even medications are like showing up to a forest fire with a little squirt gun.
So originally, I was one of the sheeple thinking that, you had to consume more protein and that would equate to more muscle, more gains. Then I realized that, everything I read from like a clinical study point of view, not necessarily bodybuilding.com, nothing against them. They have a lot of great information. Read from like a lot of other influencers or bodybuilders. They go with like the more is better approach. So, 2 to 3 grams sometime
for every pound of weight.
For every pound of weight. So if I was 180 pounds, I would need 360 grams of protein, at least. So that's a lot. For a vegan, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. Because, to get that much protein through plants, you got to eat a lot of volume. So I started looking at it and just like, it didn't make sense to me. I was like, everything I read said like there was like an optimal point, and anything above that didn't really work to your benefit. You might have extra calories, but your body kind of just like urinates the extra nitrogen and you can't really use it. Like there's a limiting factor there. So I go by lean body mass. So just because somebody's 200 pounds you don't need to consider them 200 pounds of muscle. We have body fat, so you don't need to feed the body fat. You need to feed the muscle. So I always I calculate my lean body mass, which is your total mass minus your body fat percentage. Mm-hmm. So if I weighed 200 pounds and I was 10% body fat, then my lean body mass would be 180 grams.
Got it. Uh-huh.
So then there's even another fraction that is like 0.8 to 0.9 times that. And that's the number that I go by.
Right, that's really the like USDA recommendation, right? Or it's like 0.7 grams per kilogram, I think, is what they recommend.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what it translates to in kilograms. I always go by pounds.
Right, me too.
I weigh 180 pounds right now. I keep my protein at like 150 grams. Uh-huh. Whether I'm bulking, shredding, 150.
Still a lot.
Maybe 160, like somewhere around there. Uh-huh. So that's
but a typical bodybuilder is taking in about twice that.
Yeah. No, more than twice that, because I go by lean body mass.
Right.
So a lot of people calculate it by just total mass.
Uh-huh. And how did you arrive at that, and why have you decided that that's what's optimal for you?
So there's a clinical study out there that references, I don't know the exact reference, but there's quite a few out there that show that, after a certain point, it doesn't benefit you anymore. Mm-hmm. So I figured, why not like find out where that, like I'll use that as a reference and just kind of find out what works best for me. So like I said, I do like a lot of data analysis, tracking, and optimization. So there's like certain body scans you can do to track like how much your total mass is and how much of that is muscle mass. So when you're in a deficit, like a caloric deficit, trying to lead up to a show means you have to eat less than what your maintenance calories are. Mm-hmm. So you're going to lose weight. So you want to do that as optimal as possible, because you don't want to sacrifice the hard-earned muscle that you just spent the off season trying to gain. So it doesn't make sense to build up 2 pounds of muscle just to lose 2 pounds of muscle before a show. So there's a balance point there that you have to kind of hover around, and like different scans, like DEXA scans, will tell you how much muscle mass you have. In-body scans measures like resistance, muscle impedance, or impedance, and will translate that to how much muscle mass you have on your body, what your bone density is. So I track that, and basically, if I'm losing more muscle than what I want as I'm cutting down for a show, I'll kind of like increase my protein a little bit, because that's not the goal. Like I want to maintain that muscle and like hold on to it and lose the body fat. So I just kind of use that as kind of like nutrition is different for everybody. I can tell you exactly my number. Somebody out there can go follow it. They won't see the same results because everybody responds differently. So that's kind of where I just use, trial and error.
Right. Gotcha. And what is the relationship between sourcing your protein from whole foods versus supplements?
Supplements are always going to be a little bit more processed. So different doctors out there, T. Colin Campbell, for one of them, will tell you that, when it's more processed and isolated in its isolated form, your body doesn't necessarily absorb it as efficiently. So it's always better to get the whole food source because it contains other chemicals that will help your body absorb that vitamin or mineral or whatever. So that's kind of where it led me to maybe I'll just go more whole food plant-based and see if I see a difference. And it's the same. So I just kind of shifted all my like more alternative meat style of nutrition to more whole food plant-based. So that just means that I have to eat more carbs, more beans, more lentils, all the stuff that I love eating, a little bit more tofu and tempeh, which I love as well. And I see the same results.
Right. And you're in a sport that is terrified of carbs.
Yeah.
So what's the relationship to carbs, and how do you, think about the low carb, no carb craze, and how there's a lot of talk about ketogenic diets and all different kinds of new ways of avoiding carbohydrates in your diet as a means of optimizing performance.
Yeah. I mean, just from like a basic nutrition point of view, like carbs are our energy source, right? So it doesn't really make sense to cut those all out. There are times when you can manipulate carbs to your advantage, but you don't have to. Like, you don't have to cut out carbs. Like, very much so, people in the fitness industry are carbophobic. So they refuse, like anything that says carbs in it, they're like, nah, I can't touch it. And anything that has protein in it, they're like, give me more. So my approach is like, first, like optimize how much protein you need, right? Figure that out first. Most people don't even have any clue.
And so where does the 3100 come into play? Like, how is that birthed?
I think spiritual teachers develop vessels for consciousness, in the sense that I think if he tried to start a 3,100 mile race in 1976 when the marathon was the limit, that would have been like somebody would have checked him into some type of facility. But after the 6-day race, it became a 10-day race. After the 10-day race, it became a 700, 1,000, and 1,300 mile race. And people were doing really, really well at that. And by 1996, he decided to almost double the 1,300 and make it 2,700. And people did it. There was one woman and 3 men that did it. And then in 1997, he said, okay, this is the distance. I'm not going to go beyond it. It's 3,100.
Right. 3,100 miles. This race has taken place every year since
1997.
97. And this is a race that entails running 3,100 miles within a period of 52 days, which means each runner is going to have to complete on average about 60 miles a day. The kicker is the course is essentially a half-mile loop around a high school in Queens.
On sidewalk in the summer.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It is absolutely insane. And I'd heard whispers of this race over the years, and I think I just filed it away in my brain as apocryphal. Like I thought, well, this can't actually be occurring in New York City because you don't really hear about it. It doesn't get any press. And what was so amazing about seeing it in your movie is that this occurs without really any fanfare whatsoever. There's how many? There were 12 people that did it, and that were documented. What was it, last year that you followed these individuals?
Yeah, 2016, there were 12 participants.
And they just spend their summer running around in a circle. They alternate the direction every other day or something like that. There's a couple buses and campers parked out on the sidewalk, and some volunteers there to hand out food and write down their how many laps they've done every day. The course is open from 6 a.m. to midnight, and it just goes on until it's done. And when it's finished, they're like, okay, you did it. And then that's it.
It's mind-boggling. I'd lived in that area since 1997, and I've frankly was frightened of that race. I'd run by it. It's on like my 1 mile point on my
And we didn't even
runs.
talk about the fact that you're a runner. Like you came from a competitive running background.
But that distance just frightened every single pore of my body. You know, I didn't understand how or why anybody would want to do that. And after, you know, I guess a career in human rights, and when I started getting into film, I started wondering why a film hadn't been made on that race. Of course, it would be the most boring film in the world if any film was just about people going in circles. Right. But I was encouraged to do a 6-day race, you know, to try to feel what people might possibly get out of a 3,100-mile race.
Was that when you were kind of contemplating the idea of trying to find a way in to make a movie about this event?
You know, it was even more elementary than that. Before trying to make a movie, I needed to understand, like, why to make a movie. You know, what could possibly appeal to a non-3,100-mile runner about this race? Like, why would anybody want to watch a movie about something that's so beyond what we might even want to consider doing? And so I did a 6-day race on the same course that Fred Lebow had started in 1986. And I didn't really train much. The interesting thing about ultras is that, you know, you see people from 18 to 70 years old doing ultras. And particularly since a lot of older people do ultras, I went in without much training thinking, like, if a 70-year-old could do it, like, why couldn't I? You know, I did about 50 miles the first 6 hours, then I got injured. It's like I felt my hamstring twinge.
You did 50 miles in 6 hours. That's pretty good.
You know, it's like I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to approach it. But then I felt my hamstring twinge. And as it twinged, a few 75-year-old ladies walked by me and asked me how I was doing. And that's when I realized I can't quit.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if these women are doing this race.
And also the nature of how you approach and conquer an event like that is very different than the mindset, you know, of the typical runner or whatever your background and running experience was.
And so the next 4 days, actually the next 4.5 days, I was out on the course 18 hours and I was barely doing 32 miles because I had a pulled hamstring. Mm-hmm. And all I could do in those 4.5 days was pray that I would get to run again in the race. You know, I was never more conscious of, like, my frailty than having 75-year-old men and women chatting with you and then apologizing, saying, "You're slowing me down," and then moving beyond. But I would say almost miraculously and without hyperbole, with the day left, my hamstring felt normal. It just, in an instant, felt normal. And then I took off. It's like I'd held like almost 5 full days of prayer in my heart. And when that prayer had been answered, I took off. And for the next about 21 hours, I was honestly in the highest meditation I'd ever been in. And, you know, it's like, we all say that, like, people sometimes say, like, when I chop onions, it's meditative. And I don't mean like repetitive. I don't mean that my mind was turned off. I mean that every single spiritual pore of my being felt like it was about to have the biggest awakening. My imagination felt like reality. You know, I was like feeling Hanuman. I was feeling like every Indian mythological story I'd ever read. I was feeling the presence of those beings on that course. And no matter what I did, whether I stopped to eat, I stopped to fix my shoes, as soon as I'd start running again, those experiences came to the fore.
You were having a transcendent experience.
I was.
So what do you make of that?
You know, when I talked to runners after that who did the 3,100, they said, "This is why we do it." And I said, does that experience happen in minute 1? They said, no. But after 4 or 5 or 6 days, regardless of injuries like I had in the 6-day race, after 4 or 5 or 6 days, they find that their mind shuts off, finally surrenders to the inevitable fact that they would have to be running for the next, 52 days. And the heart comes to the fore. In some cases, the soul comes to the fore, and they get experiences that are extremely challenging to get through silent meditation alone. After the 6-day race, I realized that there was a movie to be made. If I could capture that spiritual essence of ultra-distance running, it might be of some service. I wanted to explore traditional practices of running. And of course, people who've read Born to Run know about the Roramari, the Tarahumara Indians. that are connected culturally to the Indians in the southwest of the United States. So I went to Santa Fe to meet a friend who ran an organization called Wings of America, which really focuses on Native American running culture and revitalizing that. I met one of the board members who is an ultra-distance runner on the Navajo Nation. And when I went on a morning run with him, I realized that his attitude towards running was totally different than mine. I started my watch. I was looking for the GPS signal. It's like, this is going to be a great Strava run through this canyon. And it was a canyon that people who weren't natives weren't allowed to run in, but we had permission to run in it. So I was like, I'm going to get some course records, all this stupid stuff that technology and like competition, for me to believe. But he was running for different reasons. The Navajo run towards the east in the morning because that's where the rising sun is. And I could tell that this fellow, Sean Martin, who's an athletic director in Chinle High School in Arizona, he was receptive to the idea that this run, this regular morning run, would make him a better person. It could also give him an exceptionally spiritual experience. And that was his attitude for running. And that had been baked in through 32 years of cultural training on how to run. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I realized, like most spiritual teachers say, like suffering isn't the only path to enlightenment. And I think it's the same in running. It's like suffering isn't the only path to the ultimate running experience. Carl Lewis used to say the same thing. He used to be so against the idiom, no pain, no gain. There's a different attitude to approach sports. Mm-hmm. And I saw it in Sean Martin that day.
The mission of Charity Water is to bring clean water to people on Earth. And that's a very clear mission. Mission is accomplished when no human being on Earth is drinking dirty water. But the vision is actually much softer. It's some of the things that you just said. It's to bring people back to the true meaning of charity. Charity means love. It means to look after your neighbor in need and get nothing in return. And I was so upset that word, it's become tainted for so many people. And charity is a bad thing, not a good thing. Like, we need more love in this world. Mm-hmm. I mean, look around, right? We need more people agreeing to agree on serving others, on ending needless suffering, of using our time and our talent and our money to help people, to improve the world. And I just thought that the way most charities approach this was wrong. Like you said, it was shame, it was guilt, it was you have too much. You should, even the language giving back. I loathe this language, giving back. You hear it everywhere. It's like in the lexicon now, right? Oh, I'm giving back. Oh, our company's giving back. That makes it sound like we have pillaged and plundered to such extent that we should finally throw a few scraps down to the poor. Yeah. Let's give a little bit back.
So
right?
What
if
is
I
that?
snatch something, if I take your phone out of your hand, you're going to say, give it back.
Right.
Right? Why don't we drop the back? We should frame giving in the positive. We are just giving. Let's build a culture of giving in our family, in our company, maybe in our faith community. Let's give because we can, because we want to, because it's a blessing, not out of opportunity, not out of guilt or shame or debt or obligation, but because it is an amazing opportunity to share our blessing with others. And I actually would love to get people addicted to giving. It's funny, my ambition right now around money, and I'm 43, I've got, beautiful wife and 2 kids, but my ambition around money is to give more away, is to personally give more away.
Yeah.
Someone, and I read about this, someone many years ago wrote $1 million check that changed the game for Charity Water. It was an inflection point, and it took us from the brink of insolvency because we hadn't yet worked out
that last time. Yeah,
we hadn't worked it out. But I want to do that for somebody else. Yeah. Like I just have this dream of one day, I don't know how I'm going to do it on a charity salary, but one day I would love to walk into someone else's office, a young social entrepreneur, and not just give them advice, okay? Because I can give a lot of people advice, but I would like to actually... So that's the ambition, not the house in the Hamptons, not the Mercedes or the Tesla, not the vacation, the Four Seasons. And... That's really true, and in some ways it's freeing because I don't feel trapped by not having, the next, like the minute I would get the Tesla, I'm sure I'd want a better car, or the minute I went on that vacation, well, somebody went on an even nicer vacation or stayed at the nicer hotel on the island, right? So it's been so freeing 12 years ago to just step off of that rat race and think about how I can be useful, how I can be a vessel.
So many people are living their lives feeling incredibly disenfranchised. They're disconnected from the fruits of their labor, from anything that provides them with passion. They're just trying to get through the day and pay the bills. And there's this malaise, this sense that one person really can't make a difference. Like, I can put a quarter in the little box from whoever when I'm walking into Walmart, but like, is that really doing anything? And so I love how a big part of the ethos of Charity Water is helping people to really reframe that and to really understand that one person can make a difference, a very tangible, impactful difference. And with that comes this sense of purpose that can overcome one. And in doing that, you tell amazing stories about, everyone from the girl at the lemonade stand to whoever. So I thought it would be nice if you could tell one of those stories for somebody who's listening to this who feels like, I'm hearing everything Scott's saying, but I don't know how I could have that kind of feeling in my own life.
First, let me I know you haven't gotten there yet, but you basically just delivered the end of the book. So I'm going to read the last,
all right, cool.
The last line. You didn't even know where I was going to end, but that's it.
No.
So it says, at last count, Charity Water's funded more than 28,000 water projects that'll help 8.5 million people get clean water, people who will never have to experience what it was like before the water ever again. We still have so much work to do, yet every day I wake up hopeful that we will solve this problem in my lifetime. I believe that together we can bring life's most basic necessity to the 663 million people who still don't have it. I'm just one guy who built one charity, but it's made a little dent in the water crisis. Next year, we'll make a bigger dent. And this is how the problems of the world get solved, one by one, by me and you and us. I really believe that.
It's beautiful.
Like as we all join our voice together. So I'll end on a story. It's a new story. Mm-hmm. It's not in the book. We were about to launch our big World Water Day campaign March 22nd at the organization. We had a whole campaign lined up. And then somebody opening up the mail at HQ gets a note, a little picture, and $8.15. And we learn it's from a 6-year-old named Nora. And the note says, "Dear Charity Water, I saw your video, and I'm sending in $8.15 because I want kids to stop dying of bad water. I want kids to stop dying of bad water." And she draws a picture of herself next to a well in Africa, what she thinks a well looks like with clean water coming out. So Charity Water, we're storytellers. We're like, stop the presses, cancel the campaign. Let's see if Nora will let us put her on camera and tell her story. So we have a camera crew down in Virginia a week later, and Nora opens up her house, this 6-year-old girl. And on camera, she's this precocious girl that says, "Well, I saw the video, and I went up to my room that night, and I asked myself the question, should I give my money or should I keep my money? Should I give my money? Should I keep my money?" And she's back and forth, and it's so cute to hear. And she says, "So I came down in the morning, and I said I would give my money." So she drops $8.15 from her allowance, and she mails it in. And there's so much there, right? The purity of heart. And by the way, we're all asking ourselves the same question, right?
Same thing.
Should I give? Should I not? Should I trust? Should I not? So she comes out on the right side for her. And we launched a campaign around this 3-minute video. And she's beautiful. She has this heart to serve others. And when you see her on camera, you just melt. You're like, I want to be that pure. I want to, like the simplicity, back to the Bible, Jesus said, "Let little children come to me," right? We will be led by children, the simplicity of children to teach adults these values of generosity and compassion and purity. So we just told her story, and we asked everyone just to give $8.15.
And how much was raised?
I think we raised $80,000 in a day.
Right.
So that's
it's like 8 wells.
Yeah. And her
Nora.
seed, her vision of $8.15 turned into 1,000 times more.
Uh-huh. And what does she think of all this?
She loved it. And hopefully we'll get to take her there.
Yeah, it's
hopefully
really
she
cool.
can go and see some of that impact one day. You know, we do think about that. Like, how do we close the loop? But I would hope that even Nora might live her life a little differently. That the feedback loop, that seeing people respond, you know, might even encourage her to give $18
Of course it will.
and $80.
Imagine
Like,
being that age and then suddenly you're the seed that germinates this amazing flower. That has to impact her and make her think. I mean, it had to be an amazing feeling for her.
Yeah.
But going back to that sense of not educating the emotional body, think about these. Depression has a value because when you're depressed, you can go into some pretty deep places, some pretty dark places. And when you go into those places with the sense of, let me explore rather than, you know, let me feel horrible, those deep places can find character, can find parts of your being that are able to come forward that would never be noticed if you were just giddy and happy all the time. And the same thing with good grief, right? Grieving, sadness, grief. You know, these are also valuable moments, but they're not moments that we should use if we want to go back to the idea of a diet. We shouldn't use them as entrees. We should use them as, you know, maybe spices or maybe, you know, side dishes to the main course. The main course, you know, our focus on becoming enthusiastic, becoming inspired, becoming fulfilled. That's our main course, with side courses that are, you know, either warning signs or augmenting components, like salt augments the food. So depression and grief and sadness are all things that when they come upon us, we should go into fully, but giving ourselves the space. I'm going to take a sick day because I'm feeling really sad, and let me go into this sadness, let me process this sadness, let me gain the messaging from this sadness, just as if I was to take a sick day because I've got the flu.
Yeah, these emotional states are part of what it means to be human, to embrace and accept the fact that it's perfectly natural and fine to experience sadness, to experience grief, to experience intermittent bouts with depression.
And
this
I
is
just
all
have
fine.
to make a correction here.
Right.
I don't ever do this, but Rich,
what?
I'm just going to make a correction. You said what it takes to be human. I saw your dog be sad in a moment because he couldn't come in
here and hang out with us. I know. Poor girl.
Poor girl. And she went, oh.
Maybe we'll bring her in for round 2. But but yeah, I mean, it goes back to, you know, the messages that we receive about what's okay and what's not okay in this collective experience that we're having. And we're kind of taught, like, you should love your life and be happy and be enthusiastic all the time. And if you experience a moment of depression, that you should actually compound that by being ashamed or feeling bad about yourself because you're experiencing something that you feel like you shouldn't be experiencing. And of course, that's at cross purposes with how we're kind of wired, right? But I think there is a difference between that sine wave of emotional experience that we all have versus chronic states of depression. And that's really kind of what I'm focused on, is this incredible increase in persistent chronic states of depression that people are experiencing. And whether that, and you were saying like that you disagreed with me about what the cause of that is, but I want to go a little bit deeper.
No, I said I agreed with you.
They're all
about that they
part
were
of the
part of the equation,
right,
but that the cause was that we're not prepared. Think about chronic. What about chronic flu? That you go through a winter and you get it, you seem to be well, you go out and do something energetically, you get a relapse. You get it, you go through it, you seem to be well, you go out and do something energetically, you get a relapse. What's not happening? What is not happening is that there's not a full forced cure. So if I'm to go into my flu, or if I'm to go into my depression, and I can fully experience the experience, as the Buddha said, anything fully experienced, any of the emotions fully experienced, will ultimately become its base factor, which is joy. Because going in, and I've been depressed, we've all been depressed. The difference between someone who has the awareness or the knowledge when that depression comes on is the same as when someone has the awareness or the knowledge, you just passed the frog, when the flu comes on. If you can go into and fully work with that flu germ and get it so that it's completely removed from the body after you've gone through the cycle, it's the same way with depression, with sadness, with other things, with grief, etc. Think about the grief of people dying. I've had 3 or 4 people just recently reach out to me because someone very, very dear to them has passed away. And that idea of shame, that you need to grieve in private, or that you should wear dark glasses at a funeral so to hide the tears that are rolling down your face, all of this is exactly what you were saying, that crossed purposes, that shame for sadness, shame for depression, shame for grief is something that we need to remove through education. We need to inform people that their grief is good, that their sadness is of value, and that their depression has some message. And just like the flu, if you give yourself the opportunity to go through that cycle that you were just mentioning, then it won't become chronic depression. It will become deep depression, maybe even deeper than the cycles of chronic depression, but it will be fully experienced and then relieved from the psycho-emotional body.
Right. So in other words, what you're saying is if somebody is experiencing a depressive state, that there is something built into that, like a teachable moment, something to be learned if you fully embrace it, if you just allow yourself to get swallowed up in it, I suppose, for lack of a better word, to really feel it rather than resist it and try to kind of surf the wave and learn what is trying to be spoken to you through that, whatever message is trying to be conveyed is a trajectory out of it.
Right.
But I'm imagining somebody who maybe is listening to this or watching this who is thinking, I've had chronic depression my whole life, or I'm a manic depressive, or I've been battling this since I was a child, constantly in pain. I've tried to understand, I've done everything, I've tried to do everything, and it's just, this is how I'm wired. I need to be medicated for this. And feeling defensive at what you're saying. Like I could see that being provocative for somebody who suffers.
And so I would say that do not take my words as being absolute, or even that they're my absolute perspective. There are so many contributing factors to sadness, grief, depression, and all of those emotions. And some of them are genetic. Some of them are truly biological and chemical. To be able to take medication is important in today's world. We have evolved to have those kinds of substances that we can take to help balance out chemistries. But I would say to the audience, to just take the medication is going to resolve symptom, but it's not necessarily going to disrupt source. And so what you want to do is you don't want to be overwhelmed by the symptom. So you continue to take your medication, but then you also add to it something that's going to disrupt the source code of that what you call wiring. And that is, there are so many things available. I mean, just the activities that you do, you know, the bike rides, the swims, the runs, the activities that I do, the yoga, the meditation. Well, you also do those too. And these are all things, the long walks on the beach, the conversations with loved ones, the other things that we can do to help to rewire that network.
Well, Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this in his book Righteous Mind, which was so influential in my thinking. I recommend everybody read it. But in order to have unity of any kind of nationalistic unity, you need a common enemy. So the more divided a country gets, often it means the more we bicker about smaller and smaller things, it's actually like it signifies a pretty healthy society where you're freaking out over little nuanced things happening in government. Whereas like when you have a common enemy like Pearl Harbor or Hitler, I mean, that's why the greatest generation rose out of the world having a common enemy, the Axis powers. And it created this entire generation of Americans that felt unified in, we are America, we stand for virtue, we stand for valor, we stand for democracy against tyrants. And you still see people using that language in a generation like mine, where war is so bifurcated into things that don't feel like war. They feel like response to terrorism. They feel like so provincial and strange and alien and complex. And like, why are we even fighting this? To where now, you know, a lot of people my age see someone in uniform and they have mixed emotions about it. They're not like, wow, what a hero. They're like, wow, what are you doing over there? You know? And that really, you know, the breakdown probably began with Vietnam. I wasn't alive, but what I perceive of history. And we felt it a little bit in my lifetime with 9/11, where America became America for like 6 months or something. And I remember feeling that. Like, I remember seeing an American flag on like September 19th, 2001, and thinking, I love this country and what we stand for, and I want to kiss everyone I see on the street. Because there was this idea of having a common enemy. We're very complex apes who are a tribe, and our tribes have just continued to expand. So the more complex we get, the more difficult it will be to have unity as a globalized world, as a nation. And so Yuval Harari, as he said on your show, thinks climate change could do that, but as you said, it's so ephemeral, it's really hard to like hate a temperature degree difference. Yeah. You know, like what does that even look like? In terms of the way in which we speak to each other and the like complete falling apart of civil discourse, I think a lot of it has to do with us reverting to these natural instincts of creating enemies out of those that disagree with us. The moment you can like call a group of people cockroaches, you dehumanize them, and, you know, or deplorables, or whatever you want to say, and you create a categorical stereotype that is now able to be crushed. And I was listening to this interview of Oprah by Van Jones the other day, and Van Jones asked her, if you had 10 minutes alone with Donald Trump, what would you say to him? And I loved her answer. I'm still thinking about her answer, but she said, I don't know. I don't really speak to people if I won't speak to someone if I know I won't be heard. And so I'd probably be silent. Or she said something like that. And I really thought about, if you can't be heard, and this is what happens when a liberal and a conservative are shouting at each other.
Yeah, nobody's listening.
No one's listening. I mean, and that's actually brain chemistry. When you're in an argument, the part of your brain that learns new information loses blood. The part of your brain that is the filing cabinets of your own argument is raging with neuron like firing. And so the part of you that learns is turned off. The part of you that defends its pre-held positions is on raging. And so heated arguments, that's why nothing good has ever happened on Twitter except being surprised by news. It's like no one in a Twitter battle ever reaches a new idea. It's rare. I'm sure it's happened, but so I think there's places certainly important places for people to be angry. Anger is an expression of pain, is an important expression of pain, and it gets attention and draws attention to a cause. And then I think there's important places for people who fly 30,000 feet above and say, let's understand where you're coming from, let's understand where you're coming from, and let's let you both reach a place of relative safety where you can hear each other.
And so how do you do that in a one-on-one? I mean, you live in Silver Lake, but you go home, like you're home all the time, right? You're in Tennessee. You're part of that community still back there.
Oh yeah.
So when you are engaging somebody, one-on-one or at a dinner party or you're with your mom, what does that look like?
If you do not have respect for the person you're talking to, and if you cannot entertain the fact that you might be wrong, you cannot have civil discourse. It becomes charity at that point. It becomes patronizing. It becomes propaganda. I don't know that everything I believe is true. I believe certain things have significant evidence and other things do not. I've never seen a polar bear die from global warming, but I know a lot of scientists agree that it's happening. And so I tend to trust experts. I am a progressive person. I'm socially progressive. I've seen how progressive policies have impacted my life as a gay man and the life of my black friends, the life of people of color in my life. I've seen how progressive policies have changed history. I've also seen how hyper far left policies have destroyed entire nations. Mm-hmm. And so fiscally conservative people have a lot of good ideas. For me, you can have a good conversation with anyone if you're curious about what they think and why they think it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people have never asked them. And so I tend to remove myself. I feel like a very small ant on a very large planet. And so screaming at my cousin for voting for Trump and believing that climate change is not real feels like it's going to give me high blood pressure and I don't know what's going to change. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I am curious about why he thinks that way and then I make him feel safe and respected, he may be curious about why I feel that way. And I've had conservative friends tell me, you're the only liberal person I can talk to. Mm-hmm.